Hi, I'm Alex,
Hi, I'm Liz.
Hi, I'm Annie.
and welcome to the Research Room, a space to make research by the people for the people.
Perfect synergy.
And today we're going to be talking about another article, keeping with this stress and coping sort of theme. And this article is titled Association of Social Support During Adolescence with Depression, Anxiety, and Suicidal Ideation in Young Adults. This was written by Scardera et al. Scardera and her colleagues just last year. And so if that title didn't seem important enough, maybe I'll just like reaffirm this is a very like huge topic, right? So just the idea of looking at adolescence, so teens, thinking through like all the kind of like different stressors that might be in their lives, all the different hormonal changes as well, the need for like autonomy and like privacy and like also like now being in this like public space of like high school and like trying to like keep your friends and like all the different like substances that they might be engaging in and things like that, right? Like all the different experiments that teens might be engaging in. There's all these other health issues that might come along with that, stuff like depression, anxiety, and of course, unfortunately, suicidal ideation. So just the idea that like if they needed or wanted to end their lives, like how might they go about doing that? So like those are super important things that like we want to be able to stop. We want to intervene on these kinds of things. And I think a very huge way to do something like that might be social support. And so as these authors also kind of hinged on, through social support, potentially we can reduce depression symptoms, anxiety symptoms, and this thought of suicide. And so, I mean, that's exactly what they did. They got a great data set here where, I mean, they had over 2,000 people and for a long time, they had them starting at the age of 5 months, which is insane, I think. But they did it. That's great. And then they kept following them all the way up through age 20. And they had yearly assessments from there. So you can imagine there's just a lot of data here and a lot of different like change that you could see throughout someone's life. And so they have that data set. They focused specifically on ages 19 and 20 and seeing in age 19, what's happening? Do they have social support? And does that social support then predict later mental health problems? So that depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. And they find that it does. It absolutely does, right? So they were able to get these measures of social support. And with that social support, they also like decided like there might be other factors that might be like influencing depression that might also influence anxiety, right? So they wanted to like take account of that and like rule out like that it's not necessarily these things, but like and even if it is those things, social support still has a place. It's not about like demographic factors. It's not about their parental, like if their mom or dad had depression themselves or anxiety themselves, which of course would be other predictors of if the child ends up with these mental health problems. But they're able to rule that out and say, even if that is the case, social support matters. So great study here. And they found like some pretty like cool effects too. So like just raising their social support like slightly, that actually like decreased their depression by like a couple of points, right? So like if they had like severe kind of depression, like that might reduce it to like a more mild depression. So something along those lines, and also like it reduced the odds of having suicidal ideation and actual attempted suicide by like half, basically. So like huge, right? If we could start implementing this, like all the better. So all these great things about this paper, I think. And what other great things can you think of?
No, these are very key
Mm.
points. That's really the strength of the paper. So
Oh, cool. Okay, so then knowing all of that, what are some things that we should discuss? So one thing that they were really trying to do is that they wanted to see, does social support actually predict these mental health problems? And they want to see like in a more like causal kind of fashion, right? So they want to see like, do changes in the social support end up predicting those changes in mental health problems, and not the other way around? Because easily that could also happen, right? Like if you are, let's say if you have a lot of like depressive symptoms, you might not want to like divulge like anything to other people. You might just want to stay by yourself. You might want to stay in bed. You might just not have the energy, right, to like do all these social kinds of things. So knowing the directionality is super important for like intervention's sake. And so they did find good evidence that social support does end up decreasing mental health problems, but they didn't do a good job of like seeing, is this affect more than, let's say, mental health problems on social support? Like maybe that is actually like the bigger like driver here. So it's like something as simple as that like would have been very nice to see, and just start to compare like these effects across one another. What are some other thoughts you have on that?
I think another.
Yeah,
Oh, go
go
ahead,
ahead,
Annie.
Liz. No, go ahead.
I was just thinking, in terms of this is measuring perceived social support. So it's not actually like real, actual like social support, like objective, right? So in other words, like we're kind of asking them like, okay, how do you actually feel? Like, do you feel supported? But we don't know like who the actual like source is of the social support, things like that. So
I think that's kind of a big limitation because, like Alex mentioned, given the findings, it's like, oh, we can implement social support now really to reduce, these depressive and anxiety symptoms among young adults. But in order to do that, we need to know like what kind of source should we use in order to implement this like social support interventions. But given given this paper does not really specify the source of social support and what kind of social support it involved, it does speak less to the practical like implications of how we should go about implementing the social support interventions. So yeah, I mean, that's one limitation I would say.
Yeah, totally. So like the idea of the type of social support, I think that's such an important thing. You could try to support somebody's emotions and be like, if they are stressed out, you can try to make them feel a bit more positive, things like that, right? But also there's other types of support out there. So like this study mostly focused on like that sort of support, which is great. It's super important. But then there's also things like, do you practically do anything for them? Like, do you maybe give them some resources? Like if they are hungry, do you give them food? Like that is very supportive. And then there's also other things of like information. So like maybe they want to go to like the hospital or something, and they just like they don't know like what do I ask, or like what's the doctor gonna say? Like I'm gonna like feel embarrassed and like I don't know anything. But like they just want a little bit more information so that they know like how to proceed with some of these life events. So that would be like an information that would be super supportive as well. So like all these other things might end up like having the same sort of effect, but we don't know here in this case. So that would be super important. And sorry, I'm going to keep rambling for a little bit. Just the idea of like, these are all perceptions. These are all just in people's heads. Like they end up feeling like they are supportive for one reason or another. And we don't know why that is the case. They like, if we could see objectively, maybe they actually have like maybe 5 people that they can turn to and like what those people are doing. That would inform us in a very different kind of way. And we don't know if it's that perception or if it's like actual objectively like received social support. I guess research would say like usually perception ends up being like the stronger of the two, and sometimes objective like the actual received support is like sometimes negatively related to all these things, because again, people are very bad at social support. That is something I've said in the past. That is something I will continue saying. People can be very bad at social support. They don't necessarily know what to tell people in times of need. So yeah, just this idea that like we don't know what these factors are, but it would be so good to know.
And that also reminds me, so this paper kind of controlled a lot of important variables that could like be covariate with like the mental health outcomes, but then they did not consider like individual, like personality differences, right?
Mm.
So given that they focus on perceived social support rather than actual social support, like these perceptions can also be dependent on, they're just general individual like differences, right? So maybe some people, because of their personality, you know, they tend to think that, you know, they have more social support regardless of like actual social support. So that would have been also informative, I would say, because these are all psychological, right? So.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. Sorry, Liz, were you gonna say something?
I don't think so. No, I
Oh,
was just
okay.
going to say, I
Sorry.
definitely agree with that. Like being a personality, like, you know, psychologists, like definitely people's personality could, you know, play a role in that. Like, especially
Mhm.
how agreeable they are, right? Maybe more agreeable people, they think that they have more like higher degrees of social support. There's like so many factors with that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. If you're just like, if you're super optimistic about life and like maybe you told somebody like your deepest, darkest secrets and they were like, they didn't actually say anything in response, but then they walk away from that being like, oh, my friend is just so supportive. Like, we
Exactly.
didn't actually get any support there, but like, okay, that's fine. Yeah, so these individual factors, we would want to know again for like intervention's sake, like, is it actually just something about the individual? Like, can we just like make people believe and like reframe in their heads, like, oh, actually the support you're getting is pretty good. And so maybe that ends up predicting these outcomes a little bit better versus like having to do the work of like teaching people how to be more supportive and like how do you make friends and like things like that, which is like that's super messy. But
Yeah.
I mean, if it's what it takes, then yes, of course, we would do that.
Yes, exactly.
It also could be like a therapist too. So like, I don't know, with reading this paper and thinking about the results, I mean, a lot of these people might actually have a therapist, or maybe just some of them do, but that could maybe be like driving the results as well. You know, the fact that they feel supported and that person could in fact like be their therapist. But it would be useful to know like the source of the support so you can actually intervene.
Yeah, anytime we're like talking about things like anxiety, depression, especially like in this study, they specifically looked at like severe depression, severe anxiety, these kinds of conditions where they might actually seek out like professional help and not just like social support as we might think of it, like family, friends. So anytime we do something like that, like it'd be super important to also account for that variable. Like, are they even seeing a mental health professional or not? And like that could make all the difference, right? So great point.
Thanks.
What else struck you about this paper?
Actually, maybe let me go back to the directionality thing that Alex mentioned a little while ago. So even though, you know, they control for prior history of, you know, depressive and anxiety symptoms, I think that was like from their data, I measured it when these participants were like 15 to 17. So these earlier, you know, depressive symptoms were negatively correlated with social support at age 19, meaning that it is to some extent right that the more you experience, you know, these negative, you know, mental health symptoms, the less likely that you are going to get social support, because there are so many issues that comes with these mental health symptoms. So given the really important finding that the paper shows, that social support is important, like what can we do to increase, you know, people who are experiencing depressive symptoms to seek out social support in the first place, given that they don't seem to be doing that in the data itself. So I think that itself like poses a big challenge, right?
Yes.
To actually have an effect of social support. You need to seek out social
Right.
support.
Because when you have depression and anxiety, I mean, it's hard to actually like, you know, get out there and like talk to people, right? You want to usually be isolated, like keep to yourself. So
Exactly.
yeah, you raise an excellent point. Like, how do you actually get people to get that support that they need?
I think that's like it's a good point, but it's like also a double-edged sword for me at least, that like if we teach people to like seek support and then objectively they just keep not getting it, like that can make someone feel worse. So like we
Oh,
can't just
that's a
focus on the
difficult issue.
yeah yes
Yes.
exactly, unfortunately, right? Like it can't just be something like within yourself. Like it's a collective effort. Like we all have to have each other's backs, and like that is, I don't know if I would say society is set up to do that, at least not American society.
Not yet. Maybe in the future we can be optimistic.
Mhm. So maybe let me address one more other thing that's on my mind now. So this idea of timing. So um, I think it's great that they did this prospectively. So they have at age 19, they have the social support. They saw 1 year later, do they have less mental health problems, right? And I think that's all great. But then there's something about like just even thinking about the idea of social support, how much that might be changing, especially like in these teens' lives, especially at this point, right? So like who your friends are at age 19 might not be the same friends that you have at age 20. Are you still talking to your family even like between those 2 years? Like potentially not. Maybe you moved out, maybe you went to college, maybe whatever, right? Like there's so many like changes that might be happening. So I think one other thing for me would be just like understanding, are these even the same people that they're getting self-support from at that point? And like with all the like just changing life circumstances, like I imagine that that must have some sort of effect, but like it's nothing that's necessarily measured here.
Yeah, I think that's great. Like there is nothing that really shows that change between year 19 to like year 20. But given that this is a very like transitional stage in people's lives, there could be so many things happening. Yeah, that's yeah. Unanswered. I'm
Yes,
curious.
unanswered, yes.
Definitely.
um Liz, do you have questions? You have definitely have questions. I know you have
I
questions.
mean,
What
they're
are you?
more so criticisms. I don't want
Ah,
to, knock this paper
what
like off and just say it's terrible
But
because it's
usually a
not.
good paper is a paper that like spikes like questions.
mm,
So
That's
yeah,
true.
yeah.
I mean, I guess I could say like one thing too is about like the measurement. So, there is this thing called like socially desirable responding,
mm,
right? So when you do like a self-report, a lot of the times, right, you're going through like you're selecting, right, like how you actually feel. But I feel like in the case of like mental health problems, right, like sometimes people just, maybe they have like a higher like need for belonging. So maybe they're more likely to like report a certain way opposed to people who have like less mental health symptoms of like depression and anxiety. So I don't know, there's just like a few things with like social reports in general that are lacking. So we don't really
mm.
know the answers to these questions, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I think that raises 2 points in my head. One is like I don't know exactly how that would end up playing out, because like when if you have a mental health problem, like you might want to say some things that are socially desirable, but then I also wonder like maybe like you really wouldn't like maybe you would just like really want to show like
That's
screw
true.
these researchers, like I don't feel good, you're gonna know I don't feel good, and that's fine, right? Like at least
True.
is the truth, right? So like I prefer that, but yeah, I don't know, like I could see that going a couple different ways, and I don't know how it actually plays out.
Yeah,
But
because
that's
mental
it.
health is taboo. I mean, unfortunately,
Mm,
even to this day, like sometimes people don't want to say, "Oh, I'm struggling," because
mhm.
there is, that
Mm.
that stigma attached to it. So, but yeah, it could work in
Especially
different
for
ways.
extreme things like suicidal attempts
Mm.
and these ideation, like people could have, underreported these symptoms. That could,
Mhm.
yeah, that is definitely a possibility.
Yeah. So then I guess the other thing would be like thinking about maybe we shouldn't just be like over reliant on like the individual self-report, right? So like we could also have like informant reports to say like, oh, they actually like are feeling better. Like they have less depressive symptoms, they have less anxiety symptoms. Um, like I saw before that they were actually like trying to attempt suicide, let's say, like, but they actually haven't now that they've received more social support, whatever, right? Like all of that like would be just so good as well, like especially when you have these reporting biases, and like potentially like that might be like even worse, like an even like bigger like issue that we need to be thinking about when it comes to mental health problems.
And again, it's like contingent on whether that person like knows, right? If they're getting the support, right, then that person would be able to say, oh yes, like they disclosed this, yada yada. But if they're not getting the support, maybe we wouldn't even have good informants, you know?
Yeah.
Mhm. Yes, definitely being selective with who the informants are, that would be a crucial step for the researchers. Hopefully they're not just asking, hey, like, do you know this person? Have you seen this person before? Like,
Yeah, that would be bad.
um, yeah, so yeah, so many good things here that I think we should be thinking about. So I guess maybe I'm curious now about like, what do you think is going to be the best like intervention? Like, what what should we be doing? Like based off of this information, what is the next step here?
We have to make people feel supported. The question is, how do you do that?
Yeah, and I think that's the like next natural question. Like, yes, we've been saying a lot that like this study has been lacking on these issues, but like. I mean, on the other side is like they found out a super important thing, right? And like a narrow scope for a research paper, like that's what should be happening. It's a whole bunch of like pieces of information that someone else needs to like collectively like put together and like say like, oh, like now this all makes sense. Like these were the gaps. This is what's been addressed and like filled, and like now we have this information. And I think that's like that would be great, right? So like thinking about like that next step of like if we could do something like this again, but like also now have like more precise like measures, because now we know social support, perceived social support at least, it actually works. So what are the factors that go into that? Is it more of this objective thing? Is it this only from like certain people? Is it whatever, like maybe it's even something to do with like the frequency of contact, like maybe someone is only seeing somebody like once a month versus like someone who gets social support like every day, so like something like that.
I would definitely be interested in, if I had to do like a follow-up research on this, like I'll be interested in seeing the types of social support, like definitely, because like for young adults, of course, you know, emotional support is important, but like it's sometimes, you know, they find it difficult to navigate like these new environments. And also you have more things to pay, like you need to pay for tuitions, like you need to pay to hang out with other people. So like informational social support, and also like these material social supports are also important. So I would definitely kind of like test these different supports and how that like affects different stresses. And that's informative to actually carve out interventions, you know, so.
Yeah,
All I can
totally.
think of like randomly is like love
Yeah.
languages, right? So it's
Oh.
kind of like romantic relationships. Like you have to figure out like how the person wants to feel supported, right? So maybe like how their perception of social support and like what you provide are totally different and like at odds with each other. So got to figure out like how that person wants to feel supported and then design some kind of intervention to like tackle that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess with both of your points, like I'm also wondering now, like maybe what they need throughout time is going to be a little bit different, right? So like the support that maybe so it like let's say the study did a good job of tracking social support at every single year and using those as predictors for future mental health problems. Like maybe it's something about like a whole trajectory of like maybe before adolescence even they needed like more like just appraisal like sorts of things, like oh like you are like yes you are actually smart, like yes you're actually like able to like accomplish things like that, like just kind of like motivation kind of aspect that like kids might need to like continue through, so like they they start learning like those resilience sort of things about themselves, and then like when other problems start to come up, maybe they really need like that emotional support that they might end up like needing in like pre-adolescence and like going into adolescence, all the changes that are happening, and like they don't know how to necessarily control all the different emotions that are coming up, so having just a little bit more support in that kind of sense. And then like more practical issues, like when you're a little bit older, like 17, 18, 19, like I like yes I can control my emotions, but I don't know what I'm doing with my life, like some information might be helpful here. So yeah, I guess I also wonder, should we be like tracking all of that, and like should we be changing the kind of social support throughout the lifespan?
Yeah,
And
that's
it's
an important
hard.
point. Yeah.
Totally
It's hard
hard.
because like it depends on the person too. Like everyone's so different. Like Annie was
Yeah.
saying, personality, like there's all these individual differences. So
Mhm.
People are just so complicated.
Yes, it's very complicated, but that's why we're here. We
Yes.
devote our lives to try to figure this out.
yep.
um, so I don't know. I'm wondering, do I even want to bring this up? Because I'm looking at the time, and I'm like, it's potentially a big point, but it's also maybe it's something I can just bring up and we can talk in more detail in another podcast. But I guess I will bring it up. So like all the control variables again, so all of the different things that they are accounting for. Some important ones that I would really want to be able to see and like really flesh out in future kind of work would be this idea of race ethnicity, right? So different cultural backgrounds have different needs and different ways of growing up and different like things that like they might think is right or wrong, and like I don't necessarily need the emotional support, like actually stop giving that to me, that's stressing me out, like I was doing just fine just like doing my work. And so like those kinds of things definitely come up, and so making sure that we have interventions and doing the work to make sure we understand all the different like cultural variability that's out there.
I think that's really important, and also that relates to like different sources of social support. So maybe for more collectivistic cultures, like their family support is like really important component, maybe, but for more individualistic cultures, it's a different types of social support that they might need. So, you know, taking into account these different like cultural aspects could be definitely informative. Yes.
It's another reason why we need to know the source. Like, who are these people actually getting, you know, social support from?
True.
Cool. Okay, so I think that's something that this will probably repeatedly come up in future podcast episodes. But just the introduction to it is maybe good enough for today. What's our final message for today?
Social support is important.
Yes.
Go support everyone. Be supportive.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very powerful tool, really, to reduce a lot of problems, mental health problems. And I think this paper did a good job demonstrating that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, no, a really good job demonstrating that. And I mean, even outside of this paper, like social support, there's so much literature on that says like, hey, it's a good thing. Like why there aren't more social support interventions, I don't know. But like there's a lot of research that says it's a good thing. I mean, actually, I do know why it's not, aren't more interventions on it. It's such a hard thing to like actually intervene on. So
I mean, we already talked about so many reasons why it is important to actually, you know, craft these interventions. So
it's no excuse not to do it, though. We have to try, you know,
yeah.
especially with like when we're talking, the things we're talking about are so important, like suicidal ideation, mental health. So
yeah.
Yes, exactly. Great. So then let's say that's the last point here. Social support is important. Support a friend after you see this. So then what's coming up? We're doing more of this, more stress and coping all this month. So at least 2 more articles. How many days are in this month? I don't know, but that's not for me to figure out right now. I think I think at least 2 more articles on stress and coping. And yeah, we still have visual abstracts, we still have write-ups, we still have videos that are coming out on all these same topics, where you can hear more of our thoughts on this and like more about the actual research that's being done. So please check that out on our website, that is roomforresearch.com. And then we also have everything on social media. So you can find us at Room for Research. Anywhere.
Everywhere.
Yes, everywhere.
Anywhere and everywhere.
Yes.
All right. So then until next week, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
With the sun breeze.